A man walks into a bar and says, "I'm a socialist drinker." The bartender laughs and asks, "Don't you mean social drinker?" "No, I only drink when someone else is paying." This topic is broken down into three sections: the origins of a welfare state, why is it that the noble objectives of welfare state disappoint almost anybody regardless of their initial views, and finally, what, if anything, could be an alternative. The origins of the welfare state go back to the times when a book was written by Cecil Driver called Tory Radicals. It referred to a group of people in Great Britain around 200 years ago. These were people from the upper classes of British aristocracy who were very concerned about the well-being of ordinary men from lower classes, and they started a series of legislations to improve the situation. Their attitude was, after all, some people know better than other people what's good for people. We are among the elite. We know what's good for the ordinary men. We don't want to force it down their throat, but we believe that in a properly structured society, they would recognize that we do know better and would assign us to the task of structuring things for their benefit. The fundamental moral force behind this type of thinking is paternalism. The notion that some people know better what others need, what goods they should consume, what products are available, how money should be distributed, and so on. The modern welfare system comes from Bismarck's Germany, which was the most modern state to introduce it. Great Britain started introducing governmental provisions before World War I. What ultimately came to be known as cradle to the grave had its start in the early 1900s for the old and mentally deficient. This was followed by Sweden in the 1920s and by the US in the 1930s after the Great Depression and the beginning of the New Deal. The funny thing about welfare state is that when you start on this route, things go well in the beginning. You are imposing small taxes on 90% of the people to provide considerable benefits to the 10% of the people. But as time goes on, more and more people express the desire or given the chance at a part of the proceeds. So you gradually get to the position where 50% of the people are providing benefits to 50%, and ultimately you get to a place where 100% of the people pay for the 100%. You are then in a situation that Frederick Bastiat described so well 150 years ago, where he said that the government is a fiction whereby everybody believes he can live at the expense of everybody else. The question still remains, what goes wrong? Why such noble objectives lead to such disappointing results? After all, eliminating poverty and disease, providing security for old age and life misfortunes, improving the life of ordinary men, those are great objectives. The answer is very simple. Using the government to achieve these objectives means doing good with someone else's money. There are two reasons that will never work. First, no one spends somebody else's money as carefully as he spends his own, so there will be a lot of waste. Second, to spend someone else's money, you first need to take it away. Force and coercion is at the very heart of a welfare state. Sending a policeman to pick somebody else's pocket, and you have a situation where bad means corrupt the good intentions. When you try to use bad means to achieve good objectives, the end result is likely to be that the badness of means will triumph over the goodness of the objectives. So not only there is a waste of resources, but there is also a loss of freedom. Let's move to a more detailed analysis of the welfare state measures. Let's take the public housing program. Do you think it is a good program? To give you some facts, in the course of public housing program, we have torn down more dwelling units than we built. In every state, public housing units have become a source of crime. Do you think it helps to segregate all those who are poor in one place? To take all divided families and put those in one place? After all, a large fraction of the poor come from those in which the family is broken up. We need to have a very different setup. When you ask the proponents of public housing, they agree with all the bad results of the program, but tell you that we need to spend more money on it. The reaction is always, we've done it wrong in the past and we ought to spend more money to do it differently this time. That attitude could be understood in the 1930s and 1940s when the US was just starting on its road and hadn't yet absorbed all its experience and experiences of other countries. It is much harder to understand this approach 2020s when you have almost 100 years of experience behind us and have seen the same thing happen in area after area. Isn't it the time to say that it's not the particular program, it's the system that is wrong? Fundamentally, the system is wrong because we tend to forget that the laws of the market also work in the political arena. When it comes to an economy, we treat people as pursuing their own interests. The worker will try to get higher wages, the consumer lower prices, the employer will try to get the best deal, producers will try to make the best profit, and so on. But when it comes to political arena, we tend to forget all of this and look at what is the right thing to do from the social point of view. Let's persuade people to vote for it, and once voted, we will have the results we want. Surely we must look at it from a different perspective. We must understand that people in the political arena are also trying to do what's best for themselves. They are in the business of maximizing the number of votes to get elected, and they don't necessarily need to have narrow selfish interests. But as Army Alchian used to say, there is one thing you can depend on everybody else to do. You can always depend on someone else to put their interest ahead of yours. And there may be no direct relationship between ability to compete in the political arena and ability to compete in the economic arena, but they are not wholly unrelated. Those people who have not had the qualities which enable them to succeed in the economic arena are not likely to have the qualities to succeed in the political arena. And since it's somebody else's money that is being spent, there are many claimants for that money, and usually the winners are not the poor people at the bottom. There has always been the wrong idea that the bottom 51% will somehow rise against the top 49%, but that is fundamentally wrong. Politicians are not trying to win the votes of the poor. The smartest way to organize things is to leave out the top 5% because the money you can take from them is more important than the votes they can provide. You leave out the bottom 44% because they are more likely to provide you their votes and are not likely to be very good competitors. And you form a coalition from the 51% in the middle. This came to be known as the Director's Law, first developed by Aaron Director. But, of course, this is an oversimplified picture because the 51% is not a single coalition, but is made up of lots of little minorities. We are said to be ruled by the majority, but not really. In a political system, we are run by a majority, but that majority is composed of a coalition of minorities. You get 5% that very strongly agree with you on one issue and are willing to give you their vote, and you forget about everything else. Then you get another 5% and another 5% and construct a coalition of enough 5% until you get 51%. That is why special interests are so powerful. Another group of people that develop interests as the welfare state grows are the elected and unelected government officials. For example, the Department of Energy, about which we will have a separate video, has 14,000 employees and more than 90,000 contractors it employs, who are getting paid to devote a large part of their time to produce, distribute, and consume energy. So, on average, the government spends around $3 on the barrel of oil to keep the price of oil from rising. And more importantly, you have 100,000 plus employees who now have an interest for the government to take over the energy industry. The same could be observed with employees of the welfare establishment. Enacting a law that would slowly end the welfare program means putting out of business a lot of people who have nice jobs that can exert influence in administering a welfare program. I ask you not to misunderstand this idea. It is not that the members of the welfare establishment don't have good intentions or deliberately want to do harm. But everyone is perfectly capable of persuading himself. That's what's in his own interest is also in the interest of the nation. And here you have a group of bureaucrats who are doing good work and important things, and you mean to say you will be putting them out of business? And that's how government employees make it more difficult to follow policies which are in the general interest if they tend to conflict with their own interests. Let's look at some numbers now. There have been more and more welfare measures passed over the past 80 years in the name of helping the poor. It takes up around the 1/6 of the national income. The government estimates that something like 10 to 12% of people are in what they call low income status or poverty. It is a very arbitrary number, but let's take it for what it is. Suppose we divide the number of money spent on these programs, which is a little over $1 trillion a year, by the number of people labeled poor. The answer comes out little over $40,000 per person and $160 per a family of 4. If all of that money was really going to the poor, they'd soon be among the rich. But of course, that money isn't going to the poor. It is going to people in the middle and upper classes. Consider one of the major programs, which in a way is not really a social welfare program, but it illustrates the idea so well that it is difficult to not refer to it. The reference is about state higher education and some private universities, where a great deal of tax money is being spent. Who benefits? Mostly the students. Where do they come from? They come disproportionately from the upper income classes. Even those of them who come from the lower income families, as I myself did, are the ones who have the ability and energy to go to college. They are the richer ones of the low income groups. So what do? We impose taxes on everybody, including those who don't go to college, in order to subsidize the people who go to college. Basically, we impose taxes on people from Campton to send the children from Beverly Hills to college. It may sound funny, but the facts are literal. A study from a California university showed that 50% of the students at state universities came from the top 25% of the income, and only 5% come from the bottom 25%. What is true in this example is true everywhere. There is hardly a social program that demonstrates the taxation of the poor by the rich more clearly. But consider how difficult it is to change it. How often do you hear people in colleges and universities screaming that we need to tax the rich and help the poor? Yet you hear no one in the university commenting on the program that is imposing taxes on the poor to send people who are better off to college. Why not? Because we know what is good for us is good for the country. Don't misunderstand this. Everyone should have an opportunity to go to college if they have the will and capacity to do so, provided they are willing to pay for it themselves. It is okay if they can't do it at the time. Let's set up a mechanism where we could finance them through college in return for a commitment to pay back when they graduate and get a higher paying job. The details of this will be discussed in another video about education, but it's the principle that is being illustrated here. Let's take a look at the most expensive of these programs, Social Security. It's the most extreme case of misleading advertising that one can come across. It's not social, and it's not security. It is a combination of bad tax, bad relief program, and bad redistribution of money. It is sold as if individuals who pay Social Security are paying for their own benefits they are going to get later on. That's the language in which the Social Security Administration sells it. That's extremely misleading. What is happening is that people today are paying taxes on their wages, and other people today are receiving payments from the government. There is only a tiny connection there to maintain the fiction of this program. Social Security is another illustrator where the poor are being taxed to benefit the rich. It involves a large transfer of money from the young to the old, but also a substantial transfer of money from low-income groups to middle income. To demonstrate the point, let's think about, when does a youngster from a low-income group go to work? 16? 18? And they start paying Social Security tax at that time. When does a middle or upper class child go to work? 23? 25? 27? And they start paying taxes only then. It is well documented that the taxes paid by those who start paying earlier are about third higher in actuarial value than the payments made by those who start later. But that's only half of the problem. Who do you suppose has greater life expectancy? Of course, those in the higher income groups that have access to a better lifestyle and medical care. As a consequence, those in the lower income groups pay more taxes while the rich kids stay protected in schools and collect less benefits because their life expectancy is lower. As a result, you have a program enacted in the name of helping the poor that benefits the middle and upper classes. And of course, there are exceptions to this. It is a very complicated and wide-range program, but taken as a whole, it is a beautiful illustration to prove this point. Over and above the waste and bad transfer of resources through welfare measures, there are further serious effects from the point of view of maintaining a free society. In order to have a stable society, you have to have certain minimum common set of values and beliefs, and you want to avoid straining that set of beliefs. The great virtue of the market is that people who hate one another in any respect can cooperate through the market without any difficulty. When you buy an apple at the store, you don't know if it was grown by a white, black, Asian, Jew, atheist, Muslim, or any other type of person you might dislike. You might violently disagree on every issue, and yet they can grow apples and you can buy them. Free market permits cooperation without conformity, without people having to agree with one another. Political mechanisms have the opposite effect. You have to enforce conformity on people, set the standards of who gets what. When 51% of people say one thing and 49% say the other, 100% do what the 51% say. As a result, by creating these disagreements, you keep stretching the social fabric which holds a stable society together. This is why you can go much further in homogeneous societies like Sweden than a heterogeneous society like our own. But it forms divisiveness, and with recent socialist steps that US has been taking, we can see more and more aggressive divisiveness in our society on almost any issue. Politicians have a great deal to be gained by forming cohesive minority blocks of people from particular ethnic backgrounds. In addition, welfare state develops an acceptance of regimentation. The freedom of poor people who receive welfare is even less than you would imagine. They can't move from one place to another without getting a permission of their welfare supervisor. They can't put in a telephone without getting an approval. Can't buy certain foods using a food stamp, and so on. Their lives are being controlled. The effect of the growth of the welfare state is acceptance of regimentation. It also instills the notion that nobody is responsible for themselves, that when things go wrong, there is always someone else to blame. Of course, what happens to people is not always wholly in their control, but unless we broadly adapt the view that individuals are to be responsible for themselves, we cannot get a decent free society. Now the question remains, what can we do about it? The obvious answer is to abandon all these welfare measures, but we can't do that overnight. Millions of people depend on them. One of the ways would be the introduction of negative income tax, which would help many gradually get out from the poverty that welfare created. The negative income tax is not the best program in and of itself, but it is a great program for the transition period. Of course, this approach conflicts with everything that has been said in this video so far, because it goes back to the idea that the way you attack government is by finding right answers, persuading people to vote, and getting it legislated. Instead, we can identify the forces that may lead to the move in the opposite direction. As the welfare state grows, more and more taxes are being enforced with less and less benefits, and people don't like paying taxes without getting much benefits, so it may lead to a tax revolt. Total government spending at all levels has gone up, and as a result, there will be an enormous pressure on political systems to reduce taxes. So, there might be a chance for us. We must understand that the objectives of those well-meaning people who developed and continue to promote the welfare state are good objectives, and we must not lose sight of them. What we need is to recognize that there are other ways of promoting those objectives other than use of force or government. There is a strong tendency to believe that you either must have the government to solve the problems, or you have the greedy capitalists following their narrow interests. The truth is, there is a great middle ground. The 19th century in the US, when government spending never reached more than 10% and federal spending never reached more than 3%, and when there was essentially almost no welfare, was the period of the greatest outburst of charitable activity that the world and history of humankind have ever seen. You had the development of non-profit private hospitals, universities, libraries, and so on. Strengthening of the free market instead of the compulsory state mechanisms will make the society more prosperous and free. I hope you are having a nice day. Feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos, and as Ronald Reagan once said, the purpose of welfare should be to eliminate, as far as possible, the need for its own existence.